tell our audience here what inspired you to make a film about Maximilian Kolbe, and particularly the 10 days in the starvation, or 14 days?
Yeah, 14 days.
14 days in the starvation bunker. That's where you zoom in. That's what this movie is about. That's the journey we go through. What inspired it?
Yeah, I am so grateful that you took the time to watch it and for the great way that you received the film. I think for me, there was I went through a great time of suffering, a time of very profound suffering during my late 20s. I had graduated from seminary, was going on my course towards marriage with this girl that I had fallen deeply in love with, and I became ill with a illness that nobody could really figure out. Later turned out about a decade later, it turned out that it was a mold infection. But at the time, it was just one of these sort of things that nobody could diagnose. And during that time, it caused chronic insomnia. I could only sleep about like 2 hours a night. And I would wake up with from nightmares, with these just like profound and very intense panic attacks every night. And it really was like a living hell to kind of live in it. And I really couldn't do much. My relationship unraveled. I couldn't pursue my career that I'd built for doing the whole Catholic speaker thing and doing the music thing. And ultimately, I really had to just live a very quiet and rather invisible life as I convalesced. And it was the discovery of certain things about St. Maximilian Kolbe, and particularly the last 10 days of his life, while I was doing a freelance project, like a freelance writing project, that really, I think, opened me up again to faith through a new, I guess, vision of his story. The details that I'm speaking up about particularly here are specifically that he was still, not only that he stayed alive for 14 days without food or water inside of the starvation bunker, causing enough trouble for the Nazis to go ahead and just execute him, but that there were 3 other men who also survived that long with him. And from my vantage point, from the place that I was sitting as someone who had really lost hope and who was really asking the question, why live? Could there really be any reason to stay alive if the rest of my life is going to be like this and nobody gives me a diagnosis or helps me solve it? And I think if I put myself in the shoes of those other men, that would be the same question. I feel like that would be the most natural thing to be asking. And so to be thrown into this cell with a man who volunteered to be there, was a priest who in some ways is trying to be a priest there and pastor them, what would he have to say or do that could break through to me? And
wow,
that sort of propelled me into this Lectio Divina, extended, I guess, Ignatian meditation on what it might have been like to be in the cell. Every time I would wake up, I would sort of place myself there one more time again in the midst of my own kind of terror and pain and grief, and simply have conversations with Maximilian Kolbe that ultimately kind of led to a script and that led to the making of the film.
I don't want to brush by this, that, you've just opened your heart to us very vulnerably in an all-out human crisis of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
How long ago was that in your life? You said how old were you when that was going on?
I was about 25 years old, 26 years old. So that was back in, I don't know how to date myself now, but it was about 9 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so you're mid to late 30s now.
Mm-hmm.
And you are in was it a crisis of your faith? Had you questioned the existence of God? You're at the bottom of the barrel in your human existence, it sounds like.
No, I spent 2 years during that time as a professed atheist. I didn't share that with everybody that was in my life, and I'd been kind of a public public Catholic, was doing youth ministry and all that, but sort of secretly to the people around me, I was very sarcastic and brutal, like angry atheist. I'm sure that
Yeah.
you come across many of them.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me, it was just I was I was trying to lash out against a faith that seemed like it had abandoned me, and a God that I felt like had abandoned me at that time.
So you are living, whether you know it or not, you're in the midst of Psalm 22. My God, why have you abandoned me? And in those moments in our lives, again, we don't tend to think of it. We don't tend to know it. But there's this profound paradox that if Jesus Christ is God, and if he is with us in our cry of abandonment, feeling abandoned by God, that's what, my God, why have you abandoned me? If God is with us, if Christ is God and Christ is with us in that cry of abandonment, then in the moments we feel most abandoned by God, in a crazy paradox, we are most intimately united with Jesus when we are honest enough to cry out, my God, why have you abandoned me? Where do you go from that place of feeling angry, abandoned, to reaching out to St. Maximilian Kolbe? And how do you form a connection with Maximilian Kolbe in this abject suffering?
Yeah, there's actually a scene in the movie where this particular paradox is really spoken of, where Colby talks about it with a prisoner inside of the cell as he's trying to comfort him. Um, and I think that the mystery that you're talking about, the paradox of God being with us because God himself was abandoned or felt abandoned by God. Um, I I think that during this season of my life, I had a plan for committing suicide, and was like just at that I guess fork in the road, and there was something about this story of Colby volunteering to join the 9 other men, which is something that I had never really thought about. I always thought about him volunteering to save the life of another man. And
Yes,
that was sort of the way that, the story ended in, at least in kind of pop
right.
Catholic culture. Um, but when I started to see it from the perspective of almost maybe that was like a side, that was a side benefit of this descent into hell that he was volunteering to take on to be a priest and a father to these other men who were there. Um, when I began to see it that way, I started to see the incarnation that way too. That God somehow um, was descending into my
Mm,
suffering in order to rescue me from, from the despair, from the, I guess the terror that I was living in, just by His very presence. And I think that Colby's story just began to reframe who God was to me by sharing how close God can be in the midst of trial and
mm.
darkness.